the cult robbery. An insider's look into the criminal activities of the mystical traveler. In 1983, a quiet rebellion stirred within the ranks of John Roger Hinkins's Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, MSIA. Several who had once served at the highest levels of his inner circle, one a former personal secretary, another a member of his live-in staff, were slipping away, exhausted and embittered by the persistent atmosphere of intimidation, threats, and relentless harassment. They had watched John Roger move through the world, cloaked in the mantle of a spiritual teacher, yet behind that thin veneer lurked something darker, a secret empire of deceit, criminality, and coercion. They believed this hidden story demanded exposure. Desperate, these former disciples turned to Professor David Lane, Ph.D., a respected academic whose previous scholarship had proven formidable. Dr. Lane had once rattled the venerable Ekankar organization with his book, The Making of a Spiritual Movement, which demonstrated the borrowed origins of its teachings from the Radha Swami lineage of India. His research shook Ekankar to its very foundations. To the former MSIA insiders, Lane seemed the perfect ally. An accomplished scholar who had met John Roger more than once, maintained a polite, if distant rapport, and harbored an unwavering commitment to truth. Moreover, Lane's personal spiritual practice granted him the discernment to recognize authentic teachings from the twisted justifications that John Roger concocted in God's name. Initially, Dr. Lane was hesitant. Though shocked by what he was uncovering about John Roger's operation, he felt the weight of this project might be more trouble than it was worth. He nearly abandoned his investigation, until John Roger, in a characteristic fit of hubris, began to harass him. It was a fatal miscalculation. Having once taken on the entire might of Ekankar, Lane was not the type to bow before intimidation. John Roger's frantic eagerness to silence him only confirmed that the worst secrets lay ahead. In mid-1984, Dr. Lane published the J.R. Controversy, a critical analysis of John Roger Hinkins and MSIA. Within this pivotal article, part of his Understanding Cults and Spiritual Movements series, he exposed a darkness at the heart of MSIA: plagiarism, calculated intimidation, violence, and unsettling sexual exploits. It was a quiet thunderbolt across the cult's landscape, revealing John Roger as a spiritual fraudster, far removed from the saintly persona he peddled. John Roger's response was predictably strident and predictably empty. He issued broad denials, launched vicious personal attacks on Dr. Lane, but offered no substantive defense against the damning evidence. Yet denial would not suffice for a man accustomed to shaping reality. On October 5, 1984, John Roger proved just how far he would go to reclaim control. Under cover of darkness, he and Michael Feder drove to Del Mar, California, in John Roger's own baby blue Lincoln Continental. Their target, Dr. Lane's apartment. Inside that quiet coastal residence, something menacing occurred. The apartment was left in shambles, its contents violently tossed about. The bed, improbably flipped completely over, signaled that this was no casual burglary. Whoever had broken in was not here for valuables, for the television and stereo remained untouched. Instead, the thieves vanished with years of Dr. Lane's meticulous research into spiritual groups and cults. They stole files on MSIA and Ekankar, 2 personal diaries belonging to Dr. Lane's wife, the subscriber list to Lane's research series, uncorrected student term papers, and even a card file containing a lifetime's worth of precious recipes. The thieves likely believed the recipes were coded secrets, a testament to their paranoia and ignorance. This was a burglary with one purpose: to cripple Dr. Lane's ongoing research and humiliate him. At first, the culprits were unclear. Many could have wanted Lane's silence: Ekankar, other cults, or even a deranged voyeur who thrilled at reading a professor's wife's diaries. With a host of suspects, the police could do little. But as the months passed, evidence steadily narrowed the list. On a box containing copies of the J.R. Controversy, Lane's incendiary article, someone had scrawled 2 chilling words: no more. Handwriting experts identified the penmanship as John Roger's. It was the perfect signature of his arrogance. Not only did it place him directly at the crime scene, it fit his pathological need to have the last word, to instruct and dominate even when engaged in criminal acts. Still, a single piece of evidence wasn't enough to close the circle. Gradually, the truth surfaced. It became clear that Michael Fedder, John Rogers' loyal henchman, had been involved. After all, John Roger alone likely lacked the strength to overturn the bed in Dr. Lane's apartment. The trip to San Diego, they had told other MSIA staffers, had been a lie. And if Fedder had been swapped for another accomplice in Del Mar, his own ongoing shady dealings in John Rogers' orbit still made him the most logical choice. In the aftermath, John Roger did not rest. He weaponized the stolen materials, sending cryptic, venomous letters to Dr. Lane's spiritual teacher in India. Within these poison pen missives, he referenced the plundered documents and the stolen diary entries. Each letter bore the subtle signature of the same unique printer connected to John Rogers' Lisa computer, locked inside his Mandeville Canyon compound, accessible only to him and Fedder. It was a psychological assault, an attempt to poison Lane's relationship with his mentor. Yet Lane's teacher remained unmoved, forwarding the letters to Lane with a simple, powerful note. "I see no reason to do anything about these." Faced with genuine spirituality and uncorrupt soul, John Rogers' games collapsed into irrelevance. Enraged and thwarted, John Roger took his vindictive theatrics to new extremes. He created a high-sounding front, the Coalition for Civil and Spiritual Rights. Under this false banner of righteousness, he painted himself as a victim of religious persecution, implying Dr. Lane's investigative research somehow threatened John Rogers' civil and spiritual freedoms. This charade was so preposterous, so layered in irony, that it might have been laughable if not for the darkness it revealed. John Roger toyed with invented personalities, Michael Hunt, Kip Ferguson, and the august-sounding Peter Davidson, Ph.D., who championed him in the Coalition's name. Yet, these characters were mere sock puppets, their defenses as cheap and hollow as the pulp porn sources, from which at least one alias had been borrowed. Undeterred by such absurdities, John Roger continued his letter-writing campaigns, dispatching a 28-page single-space screed about Dr. Lane to his professors, employers, and influential scholars. By November 1985, John Roger was growing weary of the game. He slipped a select portion of the stolen research materials, including personal diaries, into a box and anonymously mailed it to Ekankar headquarters. In a masterstroke of attempted misdirection, he hoped Ekankar would use the materials to attack Lane on its own terms, deflecting suspicion from John Roger back onto his spiritual rival. Two enemies neutralized with one move, what could be more cunning? But the plan backfired spectacularly. Rather than pounce, Ekankar's leaders promptly forwarded the box to their lawyers, who then returned it, intact, to Dr. Lane. The prized diaries came back with an unexpected prize, the cherry on the sundae, as Lane called it. Scrawled in the margins were handwritten notes, identified by experts as John Rogers' own. In his eagerness to corrupt and destroy, he had once again betrayed himself. Like a hapless Wile E. Coyote tinkering with dynamite, John Rogers' machinations exploded in his own face. They exposed him further, revealing the pathological need to meddle, dictate, and harm from the shadows. Dr. Lane's ordeal would continue, but John Rogers' pattern was now undeniably clear. Intimidation, burglaries, the orchestrated theft of research, poison pen letters, a sham coalition dedicated to rights, and cunning attempts at misinformation. The dark heart of the MSIA empire now lay exposed beneath relentless academic scrutiny and the harsh daylight of public awareness. This ignominious chapter bled into the next. The entanglement with Peter McWilliams, a popular writer once enchanted, then imprisoned by John Rogers' manipulations. McWilliams had put John Rogers' name on best-selling books, Life 101, Do It, You Can't Afford the Luxury of a Negative Thought, and funneled over $1 million in proceeds to the spiritual charlatan he feared. Eventually, McWilliams defected from MSIA and approached Dr. Lane, determined to write a tell-all that would demolish John Rogers' facade, Life 102, or, as it would be published, What to Do When Your Guru Sues You. With Dr. Lane's files and help, McWilliams's exposé sparked national interest. It revealed John Rogers' farcical claims, his manipulations, and the web connecting him to prominent figures, like Arianna Huffington, who, faced with the spotlight, struggled to deny their association. The political fallout was swift. rumored to influence a US Senate race and further stain John Rogers' reputation. Yet this dark tale was far from over. Over time, McWilliams too found himself ensnared in a twisted coda. He eventually sold Life 102's rights back to MSIA for $2 million. John Roger now owned the very book that unmasked him. Dr. Lane, who had posted the text on his Neural Surfer website under an agreement with McWilliams, faced lawsuits from MSIA demanding its removal. Legal wrangling ensued, with Peter McWilliams testifying, shackled, sick and haggard in a courtroom, after a federal arrest related to his medical marijuana use. The scene was grim. A brilliant author, once a vibrant critic, now physically broken and legally muzzled, unable to fully support Dr. Lane's right to post the text he had once freely granted. Though Dr. Lane persisted, he ultimately faced defeat in court. John Roger and MSIA had played their legal cards shrewdly, and McWilliams's compromised position only aided them. In a final cruel irony, McWilliams, gravely ill with AIDS and cancer, was prohibited from using medical marijuana, the one thing that helped him keep down his life-saving medication. Denied relief, he died a tragic death that could have been prevented, leaving behind a legacy of wit, insight, and disillusionment with spiritual charlatans. In the end, no neat resolution followed. Dr. Lane and MSIA attempted a fragile détente, orchestrated by scholars like Dr. J. Gordon Melton. But as Lane revisited the old injustices, the break-in, the stolen diaries, the smear campaigns, the fictional coalitions for civil and spiritual rights, and even located the P.O. box that once housed John Rogers' malicious letters just a few blocks from the University of Santa Monica, the uneasy peace threatened to unravel. Peter McWilliams's final disillusionment with all religion, his plan to write God 101, There Is None, never completed, and his death in 2000 cast a lingering pall over the whole affair. His chain-smoking of marijuana by his heated winter pool, his cynical dismissal of all mystical claims, and his tragic end reflected the spiritual and moral rot at the saga's center. John Rogers' calculated malice, masquerading as spiritual leadership, had left a trail of shattered trust and broken bodies. Though Dr. Lane survived, his files partially restored, his story told, he carried these scars forever. And so we return to that incriminating word scrawled on a box in Dr. Lane's ransacked apartment: no more. Handwriting experts had confirmed it was John Rogers. It was a twisted joke, a signature of intimidation, but the phrase now echoed differently: no more illusions, no more hiding, no more feigned holiness. In exposing the darkness beneath John Rogers' empire, Dr. Lane and others had torn away the comforting masks. The truth was unleashed, and that truth was far darker and more compelling than any invented spiritual myth.